I'm breastfeeding right now, which is why I am holding my phone at such a weird angle. Hey everybody, you may have noticed that I am redoing stuff on YouTube, or what I mean is I'm kind of revamping YouTube again, and the idea is to monetize properly this time and do it consistently and actually build it. But a lot of my content is going to look kind of random for a while, and I'm kind of just experimenting a little bit, like throwing spaghetti at the walls, just seeing what sticks. But something that I would really like to do is just close the chapter on Eden, because I never uploaded a birth story for Eden, and I've done it for each of my children. And also the last video that I really made before uploading new stuff this year was I was 40 weeks pregnant, well, over 40 weeks pregnant, and I was kind of chatting about that. I never did an update. To be honest with you, I had a pretty, I want to say like brush or like near miss with postpartum depression. But you know, with hindsight, I'm not really sure how much of a near miss that was, because it felt like I was absolutely kind of like teetering on the edge of this chasm of just really poor mental health. And honestly, I don't think I came out of it until maybe the beginning of this year, when I went back to work. And so much of my identity then shifted from just being mum to kind of being Jessica again. So in my 40-week video that I did, which I'll link to, I mentioned that I was due to go in for a growth scan at 40 weeks and 5 days, and I didn't really want to go. Later that afternoon, after doing the video, I received a phone call from the hospital just checking in that I was going to come in. And when I hesitated and I said I wasn't sure, I could really detect the worry in the midwife's voice on the other end of the phone. So, I mean, honestly, I don't really know why. I don't really, doctors and nurses and hospitals and healthcare professionals can sometimes feel like an authority. And I think there's just still some of that like good girl complex in me that says, like, be a good girl and comply. So John and I went along to this growth scan. And bear in mind that once you go beyond a certain point in pregnancy, ultrasounds are notoriously inaccurate. And I knew this. So I wasn't really going to be worried by anything that they found, because I knew that it could be wrong. Because there's just not enough space to really take good measurements at that point in time in pregnancy. And sure enough, the technician was not able to get good measurements on Eden's tummy. So the circumference of her tummy, she couldn't really get a good read on that because there just wasn't enough space. But other than that, in terms of like blood flow and oxygen and the placenta function and like Eden's sort of like general movement and her heart rate, everything looked fine. But we were due to go and see the consultant. So for all the people who don't live in the UK, a consultant is basically an OBGYN, an obstetric doctor. So, and they kind of have like the final say on things. I've never met this consultant before at this point in time. I had specifically said to my midwife that I didn't want to see any consultants because they would just stress me out. And I had done that right up until that point in my pregnancy. I think that, it was probably a mistake on my part. She called us in and we were very well prepared with all the research and the knowledge and the statistics and the language to do with VBAC, so vaginal birth after cesarean. And I had had 2 cesareans by that point, so I was definitely pushing the envelope here. I was definitely making a lot of people uncomfortable because of the associated risks. But I have to say that when you start looking at the risks, you realize how low the risk actually is. And although someone will inevitably be the unlucky one, and it could be you, like, everyone has to sort of weigh up their own, how they feel with the risk. They have to decide for themselves at what point on the risk spectrum do you fall. And at this point we were still pretty okay with the route that we were choosing, which was to wait for spontaneous labour, the consultant completely blindsided us with information that we weren't expecting. So she said she was worried about Eden's femur length, so that's her thigh bone. She was worried that the growth of her femur was tailing off, and that it could mean that the placenta was starting to fail, and that she brought up the abdominal circumference as well, that it had tailed off. And then she also said that because Eden is a small baby, small babies tend to not endure labour as well as bigger babies. And I was just kind of like, I mean, have you looked at me? And I know that she did, because when she clapped eyes on me for the first time, she did a very quick up and down, as if to say like, wow, that's really all there is of you, because I am very, very tiny. So of course I don't make big babies. And actually, Eden turned out to be the lightest. Well, except for Ori, but Ori was obviously born early. So, but in terms of my full-term babies, Eden was the smallest by an ounce. So she was 6 pounds 2, and Leo was 6 pounds 3, and Fox was 6 pounds 5. So I'm very consistent, if nothing else. And I always go into labour about 10 days after my due date, more or less. I think it was actually like a week for Leo, so, you know. But in any case, I think the only reason that I went so far beyond my due date, and let's be honest, the due date is an estimate. It's not a precise science. It's very arbitrary, and it's based on some really, really old, that it's just so outdated. But I think if I hadn't been so stressed, I probably would have gone into labour sooner. So, and my wrist is actually tiring. Basically, what I feared would happen was happening. The consultant was finding anything she could possibly say to persuade us to book in an elective cesarean. She really wanted us to book in right then and there. She was due to go into theatre to deliver another baby, and she was all in like medical scrubs, and she wore a face mask. And I appreciate that maybe she was just, you know, ready to go to theatre, but she didn't lower her face mask at all, so all I could see were her eyes. I completely lost my composure, because I was basically like spiraling pretty hard, because I was just like, oh no, this is exactly what I was afraid of. They're going to find anything they could possibly say to try and force us to book an elective cesarean, even though I feel fine, baby looks fine, you know. She really wanted us to give an answer then. We said we couldn't because it was too short notice. I was in no position to make any decisions. John had to do a lot of the talking. And she kind of said, well, could you wait until after she was done in the theatre to give her an answer? And we said no, because we've got other children to look after. So we had to go pick up Fox from school. We actually ended up getting some friends to pick him up from school. So because we just weren't, you know, our heads were spinning. So she said she would call us later. She gave us 2 hours from the moment we left the hospital, and then she called us and basically asked for an answer. We said no. I spoke to her on the phone, and I explained how upset and how angry I was, and all of this emotion, and she did not respond at all, really. She just kind of reiterated that she really needed us to make a decision. She also threw in some stuff which I think is really kind of like, you know, it's like guilting people into and manipulative, because she said, like, you know, when you book in, we basically have to bump someone else. If you had booked in earlier, this wouldn't be happening. I was like, it's not my problem though, is it? You know, it's like, if this was an emergency, yeah, of course you'd bump somebody else, because the emergency comes first. Your scheduling isn't my issue, you know. It was really bizarre. She then suggested, because this was Wednesday, that we give her an answer by Friday and that she wouldn't be in work on Thursday. So could we give her an answer by Friday? We agreed Friday. Because she wasn't going to be there on Thursday, we very strategically actually declined an elective cesarean on the Thursday. We called on Thursday, said no, and then said, do not attempt to contact us over the weekend. Any contact from the hospital will be left to go to voicemail, and just leave it at that. So that's what we did. Saturday evening rolls around and I'm beginning to feel anxious for no real reason in particular. I just am feeling anxious. They've planted that seed of, things can start to go wrong. And even though I was, researching and having to find lots of statistics myself, because she wouldn't give us numbers in terms of statistics and risk when we asked her for them. How likely is it that I would have stillbirth? What are the actual numbers? She wouldn't give them to us. So I had to go and find that on my own. And the risk is there, and it's there for everybody, not just high-risk pregnancies. It's there for everybody. I don't know. I wanted to check for my own peace of mind that Eden was doing okay. And I think this is particularly true if you've had a stillbirth before, because I basically woke up every day of my pregnancy that I was aware of her inside me, moving around and stuff. I would wake up and I would lie there and I would wait to feel her move. And sometimes, definitely towards the end of my pregnancy, I even got John to put his ear to my belly because he was able to hear her heartbeat. And sometimes I would prod her, be like, are you okay in there? So we went in, had the usual, all the trace and everything, and it looked fine. It looked fine. And but then we have to have a conversation with another doctor about the risks, about how there's no point in me being pregnant anymore because I'm over 40 weeks, baby's ready. And I was like, babies are ready when they are, not when the doctor says so. I felt fine. I was much more composed. We went home and I agreed to more monitoring on the Monday. So that was Saturday. I was going to go back in again on Monday for more monitoring just to check that everything was okay. And they kept saying the monitoring is just a snapshot of in that moment. It doesn't mean that things will continue to be okay. And I was like, that's fine. I'm okay with that. Monday comes around. It's an inset day, so the kids aren't in school. So John wasn't able to come with me, but I got my doula to come with me, Jeanette. And it was the same kind of thing. I went for some monitoring and the monitor looked great. Eden was moving well. Heart rate looked good. Everything. And then another doctor. She came and she spoke to me and she kind of caught me off guard because she said, what can I help you with today? And I was like, what? But then it very quickly divulged into the risks. There's no point in being pregnant anymore. We'd have to squeeze you in. It felt a bit, my doula described it as being a bit like when it's like, come and get it now. It's this price now only. Hurry before this offer expires. It felt a little bit like that. And this time there were tears from me, much like the first appointment. And I just kept saying, I can't make this decision right now. You keep pushing me for a decision and I can't make it in this moment. I want to talk to John. I want to go home and think about it again. And so I've done this 3 times by this point, that I've gone home distraught and I've had to pick up the pieces again. I am over 40 weeks pregnant. I've got other children. It's just you should not be spending the last weeks of pregnancy stressing as much as I was about all of this. And it felt very unfair and not at all pregnancy is divine. It's sacred, and Western medicine is destroying it. And I know that there are obviously times where medicine and intervention is necessary, but for the majority of people, it's not necessary. And we are just scared into doing what they want us to do because it keeps them safe. And it stops them from being sued. And they don't care if your mental health suffers. All they care about is that you're out alive, and that's a good outcome for them, that you're both alive. That's the minimum. And obviously, like, yeah, of course that's the minimum, but what about all the other stuff that comes after that? You know? Anyway, I leave that appointment with my doula, and I'm just like, I'm so psychologically exhausted by then, because I've spent 9 months thinking about this VBAC and preparing for it and doing all the things and worrying, and you know, and then it's all starting to like come to pieces. And I had more or less given up by that point. I was like, you know what, this is just like what happened with Fox. I'm just gonna have to book in an elective, let go of this dream, and just do what they want me to do, and let them cut me open again and say that I'm not adequate, I'm not good enough, inadequate. And it's clearly still so raw for me, because when I start talking about it, this is how I feel. And I'm going to ruin my makeup. I took a bath and listened to some angry music and sang and cried and accepted my decision. And then I went into labour on the sofa that evening. At first they felt like Braxton Hicks, and I've always had loads of Braxton Hicks from really early on in my pregnancies. So I was kind of like, oh, here we go, Braxton Hicks, okay. But then they kind of just kept coming really regularly, and they were uncomfortable, and I was like, this isn't just Braxton Hicks, is it? And they continued all the way through the evening, all the way through the night. My doula came at my request at about sort of 3 or 4 in the morning, and I was just like trying to ride out these surges. And somewhere I've got my Freya surge log, so they were really coming every 3 or 4 minutes. I got in the bath at one point, and that seemed to help. And I was using a comb to like squeeze, and I was doing really well, because in my previous labours I've always been quite noisy. I was quite composed, and yeah, they were intense, and I was definitely having to work through them. But you know, the morning came and they completely stopped, and so I waited, and I just carried on with my day. And I waited, and Eden's moving around fine, and we fully expected to go to bed. And we tried to have a really nice, relaxed evening. We had nice music. We watched a film. I watched a film that I've watched a lot. It's called The Fountain. That's where her name came from, because it was a name that we were considering anyway, Eden. But then it came up in the film, and we were like, oh, just seems like, it just felt right. So we went to bed, and the morning came and nothing happened. We were due again to go into the hospital for more monitoring. We were actually an hour late because I read the time wrong. So we actually got a phone call from the hospital to be like, where are you? And I was like, oh, no, we are coming. I remember this less. Oh, I remember. Right. I went to the day unit for some monitoring. And they're like individual bays. They're the kind of bays that you go into when you're just being like assessed at the beginning of your contractions, just to see if you're actually in labour or not. Everything looked fine. Of course it did. You know, and I said I don't want to see any consultants, and I don't want anyone to speak to me about it. But I knew that they were there. I never want to see any of them again, because I just don't know what I would do. Cry, probably, if I'm honest. I was there going through more monitoring and I just broke down. I just started crying. Because I think psychologically I couldn't take it anymore. Because although I knew that I felt fine and Eden was fine at that point in time, the idea of stillbirth just kept niggling at me. And I couldn't face that again. Ori was not stillborn because of anything that we did. It was just one of those things. But I couldn't face the idea of losing another baby, and certainly not if it was something that I could have prevented. And I just got to the point where I was like, I just want my baby here. I just want my baby. So I signed the papers all the time, crying the whole time, realizing what this meant, what I was letting go of, the healing that I'd have to do physically and emotionally and mentally. We were taken to another room to sort of for me to change into the robe, and I reapplied my makeup because I was like, I at least want to go into the theatre feeling like I look up together and I don't look like a mess. Eventually they came and got us and, got me ready for theatre, and John was there the whole time and he was my absolute rock. He was just like a knight in shining armour the whole time. And she was born at 5:35 in the evening via cesarean. And so that was that, really. I completely forgot to say though that when I was actually on the operating theatre table and they had begun, that they spent ages trying to decide how much pain medication to give me. So I had a spinal block, so I was awake, but I was numb from sort of the shoulders down. And they started, and then halfway through the procedure I yelled out and I said, you've got to stop, stop. I was really loud because I could feel pain. And so they immediately stopped what they were doing and they gave me, I think they were topping up the spinal block, and they gave me way over and above what they were expecting to give me. I think in the end, John remembers this better than me, but he said that they gave me more than they would normally give for an average sized person. And I think that they were saying that if it didn't take effect enough, that they would have to give me a general, which didn't end up happening. They were able to get my pain under control and then continue. But for a very short time, I was in pain, and it made me feel completely loopy, drunk. My face started to tingle and my arms were going numb and everything. They were keeping a very close eye on my heart rate, which actually they discovered that I was having something they call ectopic beats, which is an extra heartbeat. I'd been having them for months, but they actually picked them up in theatre. And then I had to go to cardiology after that and have it looked at. It's nothing. It's gone now. But yeah, that was a pretty scary moment in the middle of surgery. Also, I had to spend a lot of time in recovery because the operating theatres are always air conditioned, and your girl here doesn't have a lot of insulation. So I had been on the operating table for quite a long time and I had become really, really cold. They were really concerned about my body temperature. I don't know what it got down to. It may have been something like 35 degrees or something. And so they were like, we need to put you in recovery. And they gave me this kind of I can only describe it like bubble wrap blanket that also had warm air being blown into it, into all these cavities in the blanket. It was yum. But the surgery itself actually went really fine. And after a while I just called the nurse and said actually I'm getting kind of warm, and I spent the whole night pretty much holding Eden in my arms. I've had the same issues with breastfeeding as my others. I seem to not have enough glandular tissue to actually produce a full supply, so we have combi fed from the beginning. That was also very stressful in the first few weeks of her life, that history was repeating itself and that she was not gaining weight quickly enough, and she also just seemed unbelievably hungry but also sleepy. But other than that, like, she has been an absolute joy. I only wish that my personal mental health had not suffered as much as it did. I love her now, but it definitely took me a couple of months to really feel like I really love her and she's my baby. And in the beginning I was like, of course I'll take care of her, like, she's, she needs care. But it took me a while to really like fall in love with her. And now she's like the light of my life, like all of my children. Not saying that we are, but if we were going to have another baby, I would probably just book in for an elective cesarean because I cannot do that again. It just broke me. A lot of it is to do with how I feel about myself and being smaller than the average woman, much smaller, and growing up with that. I think, you tend to want to sort of show people that you're not small and broken or fragile or dainty and delicate. You want to show people that you're just as capable and that, you can do this thing. And the other thing that really doesn't help is when you've got stories around you. Well, this person needed a cesarean and this person needed a cesarean because, they were just too small. Just because I am small does not mean that I'm broken, and it does not mean that my body is not intelligent and that it does not know what to do and that it does not know how to grow a baby that is an adequate size for me. But I think that when we do, when we have lots of like measure this and measure that and, history of this and history of that, and you've got all these kind of like ways of measuring and intervening in Western medicine, it gets in the way of what the body is naturally capable of. And if we were so inept at giving birth, we would not have made it as a species this far. The cesarean in the UK now accounts for almost half of every birth, and that is elective and emergency. I just wanted to sort of edit to add that I actually did complain to the hospital about how I felt I was treated during those final weeks of my pregnancy. To cut a very long story short, I ended up complaining. I complained, and then I actually felt like I wasn't satisfied with the response, so I escalated my complaint a second time. And then basically they were like, we did everything we were supposed to do, sorry you felt that way, sucks to be you. Eden Aurora was born on the 6th of March 2024 at 5:35 p.m, weighing 6 pounds 2 ounces, and she's lovely.